I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 1, 2, 3.
Ooh.
Max trying to mess me up there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's going to mess your flow up, isn't
Yeah,
it?
welcome everybody. Welcome to the Mossy Oak Gamekeeper Podcast here in our humble studio. We're so excited that turkey season is on the horizon.
Yeah, the sun was out yesterday, started warming up a little bit. So.
Man, I hate to start thinking about it because that's like another, 6 weeks I won't be able to sleep.
Yeah, that's true.
Turkey season is here, y'all. I mean,
Yep.
you just can't pull the trigger yet, but I mean, it's turkey season. In
lot-
my mind, it's
Yeah, me
Close,
too,
it's
me
close.
too.
They are strutting.
Yeah, quite a few people sending in pictures of, look, I'm hearing a turkey gobble. I'm seeing some strutters.
Seeing some strutting, no doubt about it.
And as a guest today, we've got probably, I'm going to say our favorite biologist, our favorite doctor, our favorite turkey scientist, Dr. Michael Chamberlain.
Here, here. All right.
Do you buy all that, Mike? Or do you think it's
No, not at all. I don't buy any. I hear him say
I
that
didn't
every
think so.
time he has a biologist on there.
I thought I'd get a smile. Didn't even get a smile from him.
I'm smiling. You just can't see it for the facial hair. Yeah.
You know, he did that to me on one of the podcasts and said his favorite boss, and I was so enamored, and then I realized he only has one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Besides the one at home.
That's
I got
right.
one at home too. So, Mike, it seemed like we always have you around turkeys. Occasionally we talk deer hunting with you and all that, but it's this time of year has got to be really busy for you, as people probably are asking you a lot of questions, wanting you to make appearances. And how you dealing with it? How's it going this year?
It's like we were talking about off the air before we started. It's crazy. This is a crazy time of year for me. In a lot of good ways. I mean, it's humbling to know that people want to talk to you and they want to hear what you have to say, and they want you to attend events and do whatever. But it is a grind. I'd be lying if I didn't say that. I was looking at my February calendar and with my wife the other night, and she came into my office and at home, and she glanced over my shoulder and she was like, "What is that?" I was like, "That's my February calendar." And she goes, "Wow, okay." I think there were 3 nights that I was planning to be at home during the month of February. It's crazy.
Wow.
Just trip after trip after trip, and that's good because convention's coming up,
Yeah,
and
spreading the word.
yeah, and it's cool, man. I enjoy it. It gets me worn out before turkey season ever starts, which kind of sucks because then you're running on fumes before you start really running on fumes. But
Well,
it's all good.
hopefully you've chiseled out a little bit of that time on that calendar to do some habitat work and go play in the woods a little bit by yourself for sure.
Yeah, I try to. Well, to that point, Dudley, my early March, actually my March 1 to about March 20, believe it or not, is fairly open, and I do
Okay.
that intentionally. I try to push my prescribed burns back as late, as I can without jumping into the nesting season, which here in my part of the world peaks about April the 15th, and so I try to get those burns on the ground as close to the onset as I can without running into it. So yeah, I'm optimistic that I'm not going to get pulled in every direction in early March and can get that drip torch in my hand. And hopefully the weather cooperates. As y'all know, this
Yeah.
year has been a bizarre from a weather perspective.
Oh gosh.
I hope the fire weather days hold out and we can actually get out there and do some work.
Us too.
Yeah. So how did your deer season go, Mike?
Bobby, it was interesting. I would say it was probably the most hit and miss season I've ever had. And when it was hit, it was special. And when it was miss, I wondered what the hell I was doing sitting there why I had gotten up, why I had stayed up late. It was just really odd. Bow season was hot and miserable as it was for you guys, and we had a bumper acorn crop that's still laying on the ground, and deer movement was really poor. And our rifle season opened, and I started traveling a little bit, and I killed a really nice deer early in the gun season here. And then I'll be honest with you, I kind of lost my motivation. I didn't hunt a lot because I was really busy with work, and my wife and I are renovating a house, and so I just got stretched thin. And when you're going and not seeing deer, it's easy to become distracted with other things in life. But then we got to about mid-December, and I got pretty mad at them again, and ended up on a really you ever have one of those days where you just know you're going to kill something? Like you just know that you're going to kill an animal. I don't know if other people have those days, but I do. And I've had about 6, I guess, through the years. And I just know that it's about to come together. And it's hard to explain, but I think it was December the 16th or 17th. It was one of those days.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a client's property. We were flipping through pictures, and I said, "Hey, have you seen this deer?" And it was a big 8-point with double kickers and on his twos. And he said, "No, we haven't seen that deer. He's still here. We've gotten pictures of him, but nobody's laid eyes on him." And so we piddle around the rest of the early afternoon and go get in the stand. And when I climbed in the stand, I knew it. I just knew it. I was sitting there. It was you've had these days. It's crystal clear, beautiful northwest wind, ideal conditions. You get in the stand, and 5 minutes later, deer are already moving. Like, they're all around you. They're calm. They're just hanging out. Nobody's chasing yet. The rut's not on. It's just everybody's having a laid back day in the deer world. And does start piling out in every different direction. And I don't, I think most people probably know what a talisman is, but an object that you think represents spirituality or good luck. Well, my talisman is a rifle hull. Okay. And it was the bullet that Austin shot his biggest buck with. And so I carry it in my pocket, and some days it just sits in the pocket. Some days I'll pull it out of the pocket. Some days I forget it's there. Well, this particular day, I'm sitting there and I'm rubbing this talisman in my pocket. I'm like, man, it's going to come together. It's going to come together. And like I said, deer they were everywhere. They just piled out everywhere. And I looked to the right, and there's that deer, the one that I had just asked the client about. There he is, standing there broadside at 70 yards, just at 4:45 in the afternoon, sunny, just broad daylight.
Wow.
And man, I thought for a second I had screwed up. I had my binoculars. I was glassing a buck that had walked out in front of him. And it was a 4-year-old and really nice deer. And I looked at him and I was like, man, that's a pretty deer. And I dropped, you bring the binoculars down from your eyes. And I was in a shooting house, elevated stand, and I had one of the window on that side up, and he saw me. I didn't know he was there, and he was staring into the stand, and he saw something, but he didn't know what it was. And it was me moving those binoculars down from my eyes. So he and I got into a stare off for what seemed like, an hour, but it was probably about 30 seconds. And I just kept saying to myself, just don't move, Mike. Just be calm. He doesn't know what you are. and I saw his tail flicker, and he started calming down, and he turned and walked off. And when he turned and walked off, I put the binoculars down, got the rifle, put the rifle out the window because I knew he was coming back, and because he was calm. He just knew something was amiss. So I saw him, his legs walk off, and he stood there for about 5 minutes. And that worked out well because I knew he was big, and he was, and that let me kind of calm down and, and get my wits about me. And sure enough, I saw that tail flickering, and here he comes walking back, and he was just as calm as a cucumber. Walks out, and boom, rest is his history. And I get over there, it's a 152-inch 8-point. I mean,
That's a toad.
that's
a
big,
good
big guy, and
That's a big one.
to have short beams. I mean, he had 22-inch beams and still scored that.
Wow.
And it was because he was so massy, and it was just
Wow.
so that was pretty much the end of my motivation. I started duck hunting a little more and went on some pheasant hunts and did this and that. But anyway, to your point, it was really hit and miss. But when it was a hit, it was special.
Do y'all ever get that feeling when you're in a stare off with a deer that if you keep looking into their eyes, they're gonna see you blink?
I don't look them in the
I
eye.
don't
I have
look
to-
them in the eye either.
I have to make myself not look at their eyes.
It makes probably no difference. Who knows? But I do not make eye contact. if they
Me
look at
neither.
No.
I look down.
Everyone I have made eye contact with
I don't know
ran
why.
off.
I mean, and when you are making eye contact, you catch yourself starting to breathe harder, and then you start blinking your eyes.
Well, the worst is turkeys because I know I'm probably okay, but if I blink, and then I blink a lot, so then I'm about to die to blink, and there's still one right there, and I can't, it's tough.
Yeah.
It is.
That kind of gave me a little anxiety thinking about that stare down.
So, Michael,
They just eat a hole right through you.
Oh yeah.
Well, the difference
You know what I
is,
mean?
deer, you can come out on top sometimes, but rarely does the stare
No.
down work with turkeys. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
It just
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
What on this client's property? What age class buck? What are y'all trying to get your bucks to?
Most of them 5 or older.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It really just depends. This property is in an exceptional area of Louisiana, and soil productivity is very high, and the trophy potential is off the charts. So we usually don't harvest 4-year-olds. There are some exceptions. I mean, we're trying to manage a large piece of property with a fairly high deer density. So, if you have 4-year-olds, and this, I'm giving you this scenario, not, this certainly doesn't apply to everyone else's scenario, but on this property, you get a 4-year-old generic 8-point that scores 110 inches. As Bronson has talked to you about, I mean, he's already expressed a lot of his antler potential by that age. And if you have hunters, particularly young hunters, that want to harvest bucks, that's a prime candidate to harvest. Why feed that animal for another year or two so that he can be 120 inches if your objective is to grow the best quality animals that you can. So I say all that to, we don't harvest any bucks until they're at least 4, and then we tend to, we scrutinize them pretty heavily at 4. And if they're bottom dwellers, if you will, I'll call them that, then we put them on a hit list. And if there's a hunter that's there that has an interest in harvesting a deer of that quality, then go for it. And if there aren't, then he gets a pass until the next year, and then his pass ends. So
Yeah. So that you would consider that a management buck, that scenario you just described.
yeah, I mean, just a deer that is not what you're seeking to produce. And my opinion is it doesn't make sense to feed that animal for a year. I mean, you've had whether it's Bronson or Steve or other guests on that, a buck consumes a lot of forage in a year, and it doesn't make sense to me to feed that animal if based on the science that he's not going to be the animal that you're seeking to produce the following year.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. That deer is also taking up space that he might prevent a better deer from moving into that area.
Well, yeah, he's occupying a home range, and he's also, he's interacting with other bucks. He's competing for breeding opportunities. He's competing for resources. He's, like you say, he's competing for space, and that all of that matters in the deer world.
For sure, too. I saw Tom works for me, sent me a video this year of he heard two bucks fighting, and he eased up there. It was in the middle of the day, in the middle of the rut, and the one ended up really whipping the other one was half his size, rack-wise. So what your point is, just because, I mean, the dominant deer is not necessarily, probably not even normally, the biggest set of horns. This deer one was probably a good 19, approaching 20 inches, very heavy, beautiful mainframe, like 8 with a couple of kickers, just a stud. The other one was an 8, but he might have been 15 or 16 inches and just kind of tight, a little shorter points, a little heavy, both about the same body size. Maybe the smaller horns were a little bit bigger body size. But I was showing him, and then next thing you know, he's whipped that deer so bad, he's running, chasing him off. And point well taken about that. I was just going to point out, we've had information before and on the Gamekeeper show even about, be careful thinking you can cull your way into a better deer herd. And research indicates that's not a magic button. But what he's talking about is different than that. He's not saying that taking out a deer that's proved to be inferior is necessarily going to, change your life in the future genetically. But he is saying, probably more importantly, taking a strategic mouth off the place, because there's nothing like releasing more carrying capacity.
Yeah,
nothing. In my opinion,
that's a critical distinction, because
that's different.
To Toxic's point, research has shown you're not going to shoot your way into genetically altering your herd. That's just not going to happen. The way I look at it is solely from a resource standpoint, based on the landowner's objectives. This particular client, his objective is to, among many objectives, is to produce the highest quality deer herd he can, given the fact that, this is a free ranging herd and obviously there's limitations, but his goal is to produce the best he can. And he puts a lot of money and his own time into it. And if his objective is that, it doesn't make a lot of sense from a resource perspective to let that deer we've described live another year when he's gotten to that age.
Your daughter's been begging you to hunt since her little brother shot the big 8 last year. You've ran a fire, dissed the fields, got stuck, got unstuck. Planted food plots, fertilized, and prayed for rain. You moved trees, limbed roads, even bought one of those fancy cell cameras.
So what's your excuse?
LS Tractor.
Moultrie has pioneered the game management category. Today, Moultrie is one of the best-selling brands of feeders and seeders in the world, and they continue to innovate with new technology that gamekeepers will rely on. Moultrie products are always field-tested and designed for hunters by hunters, combining forward-thinking innovation with time-tested practicality. Moultrie, first in feeders since 1979. All right, so guys, Moultrie is offering our listeners a 15% site-wide discount at MoultrieFeeders.com. Use code Mossy Oak with a capital M, Mossy Oak, at MoultrieFeeders.com and get that 15% discount.
I mean, we tend to get a lot of, just like he mentioned, like average 110 or whatever, 8 points. And they may start to get heavy, but they never have any time length their whole life. You can identify that. I'm just saying it's a good practice to go ahead. If you want to kill some deer, kill that one.
Yeah.
I mean, let the 4-year-old 10-point go.
Yeah.
I know that's tempting. Your biggest, best deer, but if you've got a group that all cooperate like he has, and you want to shoot some deer, shoot that deer. I mean, that's a good one to shoot. Just don't expect miracles to happen because you cull,
So, Mike, let me ask you one more deer question, then we'll move on to some other topics. But on this property you're talking about, what would this buck that you killed, what would he have weighed pre-rut, and then what did he weigh when you killed him late season? And just can you talk about how much weight bucks on average lose during the rut process?
Yeah, on this particular property, believe it or not, mid-December is pre-rut. The rut in that part of Louisiana is actually well into January. And in fact, I have a client that's still hunting right now that texted me last night saying that he had two mature bucks that were chasing a doe in front of him, this late. So that particular buck, I think was 245, I think is what he weighed. And that's pretty and this deer, we think, based on our knowledge of this deer from the last 2 years, because he had distinct kickers on both of his G2s, that he was a 5-year-old, and that's about 240 to 260 is for that part of the world with intensive management. That's about where our body weights end up for our mature bucks. That same buck would be 200 pounds, 210 pounds, say right now.
Yeah.
And you can see it very clearly. And that's a really good point and I know we're going in the deer world now, and that's fine. I love talking about deer. That creates some real challenges if you're unfamiliar with who you're looking at as a hunter. In other words, if you're trying to identify bucks based on their body kind of, their body, you're trying to age the animal on the hoof, and you don't know who you're looking at. In other words, a buck shows up out of nowhere. You don't have pictures of him. You have no knowledge of who he is, and you see him a week after the rut. He's not going to look like his age.
Yeah.
And that makes it really tough.
That's a great point.
And what I have done in the past, a lot of us we stop paying attention after the season ends, right? We run cameras and then we stop and we move on to something else. Kind of like what we're doing today, talking about turkeys in the future. And I think that's a critical mistake. I like to run cameras well on after the season, because I want to see what my mature bucks look like after everything's said and done with. And what you'll see is if you're careful and you really scrutinize your pictures of deer after the season, you can pick up cues, the loose skin around the chin, the sagging skin around the belly and the waist, and you can pick up cues that will tell you, man, that guy he's peeled some serious weight off in the past 6 weeks. And that may help you for the following year if that buck shows up out of nowhere, that you've got an idea of maybe who he is, not just looking at his antlers, but looking at his body after the season ends.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you made that, because that's kind of one of the things that we've been seeing as we start talking about older deer and recognizing them, because they look so different in the summertime, and they do pre-rut, post-rut. And that, even some of these younger deer, as the rut approaches, they just get all jacked up, and all of a sudden they look like a different animal, so to speak. So
yeah, and I've seen this through the years, and I'm not going to say I taught people, but I have mentored people that hunt with me through the years. There are some bucks, particularly ancient bucks, old bucks. They will look like a 3-year-old until a month before the rut. But if you look at them, they'll have that pot belly like an old man. They'll have some loose skin around their face. They'll have the squinted eyes. They'll have those things that a really old buck has, but they wait until the last second to bulk up. And I've seen this really commonly in the deep South, where it's warm leading up to the rut. It doesn't make ecological sense for a buck to bulk up too early. It just, that doesn't make any sense. And I think as you get these older bucks that are experienced and they've been through a number of breeding seasons, they get cued into their clock. They know exactly when they need to start bulking up from a resource perspective. And they look completely different, say on an October preseason survey than they do, say, December 15th. Look like a completely different animal. And I see this a lot, particularly in that area where this particular property that we're talking about, where that property is, because it is so miserably hot until well into the season. I think a lot of those bucks just lay low, and their clocks know there's no need in gaining a bunch of weight right now. You're not going to start burning that weight for another 4 weeks, so why gain it?
Isn't that interesting how that works? You know, and there's even days, like really cold days, Mike, that you'll see one, and if you hadn't been paying attention, they're almost
all
like they're
fluffed up.
yeah. And you'll
Yep.
think, oh my God, look how big. But it's just his hair.
You'll see that with camera surveys too, and that's another thing to really pay attention to is if you've got pictures of animals that are posturing for other deer, that's something you have to be aware of. If there's other bucks around and they're just off camera, that could change that, the guy you're looking at, that can change his posture, and that can change the way he looks and his mannerisms. And so when I'm trying to do camera surveys for people and give them pictures of deer to help them identify them, I'm trying to avoid those pictures that you just mentioned, where they're bristled up, they're posturing, because man, those deer can make you make a mistake sometimes.
Yeah, you need a bunch of pictures of that guy to.
Well, I mean, we
overrule that
see
one.
old deer that are just even well before we see, they're just so different, But some will be so beefed up and so fat headed and so just like just bulging around the eyes. They're so fat and old and pot bellied. And some deer we know are old, like you said, will fool you. You think they're just like a 3-year-old body size. The only thing I ever can see that confirms it for sure for me on that deer is that skin. And you can tell me if I'm wrong. When you see a super that skinnier back end and the bigger shoulders, and he's getting way on up there.
Yeah.
To me,
for sure.
But yeah, some individuals could be 3 or they could be 9.
That's
and
right.
It's just hard to tell. And
Really
some
old,
individuals, it's just obvious,
Yeah, for sure.
So speaking of old man, we need to wish Toxie a happy birthday. He recently had a belated birthday.
right.
I knew when he said, "Oh man," where it was headed. I just didn't know about the birthday.
Oh man! All right, Mike. We're going to talk turkeys, but one more thing I wanted to ask you about. What is the latest on the foundation that you started?
Yeah, Wide Open is kind of the latest on that. So I launched the Austin Hunter Chamberlain Memorial Foundation in May of last year, and I've been very deliberate, very very slow and methodical in what I've done with it. Toxie's one of the board members. Jason Hart with Mossy Oak's one of the board members. I've got a website launched, and now we're just wide open. In fact, I've done some fundraising. I've had some donors who were very generous that have donated enough money for me to really get the foundation up off the ground and do the things that I want to do, which is kind of twofold. One is pretty simple, and that's just provide seed monies for young people who are passionate about archery to be able to be mentored by gifted archers who can teach them how to do it right, put those young people in competitive situations where they can shine and where they can learn from the industry. And there is, as y'all know, a massive industry in the archery world. And from a competitive standpoint, and Austin he cherished that. He traveled, shot competition archery, soaked it up, and there's a lot of young people that don't have the opportunity to do that because they can't financially make it work. And it takes some money to travel to these shoots, and it takes money to be educated by the best in the business. And I want to make that happen for young people who are already gifted. They just lack the opportunity. And so that's one. And I actually have a fundraiser going on right now at the Vegas Nationals where we've got a giveaway going where a company that Austin worked for, an archery company, Ultraview Archery, they've got some tricked out gear that we're giving away. Folks are making donations and in hopes of getting drawn to get some of these items, whether it's scopes or releases, hats that have the foundation logo on. It's pretty cool. It's gained a lot of attention thus far from what I can see, and so that's cool. The other thing I'm doing, which is really more of the focus of the foundation, is identifying small cohorts of young people, say 18 to 25, who are already passionate hunters and fisher persons, and they've been successful. They want to do it, but they are lacking the opportunity to be mentored in a way that can allow that passion to blossom, to get the stewardship side of it to be, to be able to kind of develop not just as a hunter, but as a conservationist and land manager. So, so what I'm doing there is I'm identifying small groups of young people. I'm immersing them in repeated experiences where the foundation will support them traveling with me and other board members and mentors to different places, do some hunting, do some fishing, but more importantly, be around the people that are responsible for managing those properties, be around the science, talk to people from a diverse set of backgrounds, and understand what it took to produce the quality of properties that these young people will get to experience, because that's what Austin did. He traveled with me. He saw places. More importantly, he met people from, all kinds of backgrounds. He learned from people that had no formal education at all. All they did was drive a tractor and plant fields, but damn, they were good at it. And they took pride in it. They explained to him how to do it, how not to do it. And he soaked it up. And then the next camp, he would, there's a neurosurgeon there. And I was like, wow, man, you get paid to, cut people's heads open. And yeah, but my true passion is hunting and land management. And here's what I've done on my property. And here's the people that helped me do it. And young people are a sponge. And if you repeatedly put them in situations where they have mentorship and they can get science-based information that works, they can see it with their own eyes, they can experience it, they can see this is what it took to put those ducks in that impoundment, they will take that information and they will run with it. They'll take it back to their own home state. They'll take it back to their back 40. They'll talk to their friends about it. And I want young people to get that information directly from the science rather than relying on the internet. And so that's where I've started, and I've got my first little small cohort, I think, identified, and I'll get started with that later this year.
These are not just born of the need in the world, but out of Austin's love and passions. So they're so true. But even though that's where it was born from, I'm on the outside looking in, talking to you about this, Doc. They are truly unique also. I've never heard of anything going on to help, for lack of a better word, tell me if I'm wrong, underprivileged archery enthusiasts, especially the competition part of it, which, can bleed off into, school competitions and, young kids and everything.
Sure.
And then secondarily, what he talked about. So I just want to say, it is from the purest of intentions and honoring someone incredible. But if you have a bug in you to do something, this is a great place, maybe the best place I know of. to donate. So I would like for you to say, I won't go on and on. I just want to know, people know how pure and true. And also, quite honestly, the world knows when he puts his mind to something and then he runs something, it's going to be really, really done right and organized and to the nines. So I would be sure, please take a second and say where people could go to or send to donate, because I know there's someone listening right now that would love to aid the cause.
Yeah. So we launched a website for the foundation. It's austonsway.org. So it's just Austin's WAY.org. And if you go there, you can read about Austin, you can read about his life, you can read about his passions, you can obviously see how you can contribute to the foundation if you choose to do so. If you don't and you just read about who he was, that's a win. To your point, Tox, I mean, another thing that I've seen that happens when you put young people in front of information that is coming from people that they learn to trust over a couple of days. They interact with somebody for a few days and they establish a point of contact for information. They know that if they need to understand what's the best planning rate for this, I'm going to call Dudley. I have his cell number. I follow him on Instagram, whatever the case is. I know I can call this guy and I can get that information. If you do that enough with young people, you are providing them with an incredibly powerful tool, because now they have these resources that they trust, that they have been mentored by, that they have befriended, and I see it with my own eyes. I saw it I see it with my daughter still. I saw it with Austin. They will constantly go back to those sources because they trust that person. And if I can put young people in front of other people that have science-based information, that they will use that information repeatedly, and they will disseminate that information to the people around them. And in so doing, they'll make the places that they spend time better environmentally.
And this is how you make future leaders with programs like this.
Oh, unbelievably. So biggest need today in the world for younger people. And this isn't just about teaching them hunting and fishing. It's about adding so much value to their life they could never get anywhere else, because we're evangelists for that connection with the outdoors. But the problem is always access to a place to go, access for someone to take you, access. But what he's trying to do with this connection is, access for life to people that can add value, love and friendship in your life. It's so much more meaningful than just take a kid hunting. And that's great. I mean, those saying, take your kid hunting, never have to hunt for your kid. Well, it's honestly not quite that simple. That's a lot of truth to what we love. But what he's done is take it, like I said, to the nines, all the way to forming relationships for life. That is just incredible.
Well, Mike, we're excited to hear about that. But this whole thing, it really touches us here, and we're just so impressed watching you and the love of a father, and what you've done to honor Austin is very, very impressive.
No doubt.
Thank you.
The most.
Yeah, it really is.
Nosler is known for their bullets, and now they're making suppressors. Nosler suppressors are made for hunting. Adding a Nosler suppressor to your rifle will make you a quieter, more accurate, and more effective hunter. Protect your hearing and disturb less game with a Nosler suppressor. The time to hunt quiet is now. Learn more at nosler.com.
All right, let's turn the page just a little bit.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about turkeys. There's some recent research, Mike, that you've been talking about on your Turkey
dreaded
Tuesday.
research people. Here we go again.
But you guys have got the largest, from my understanding, the radio collar data set of, as you call them, toms.
What's a tom?
We call them longbeards. But
Gobblers.
and
mature.
you're helping influence some state agencies how they set seasons. Can you talk about some of this latest stuff, please?
Yeah. So so yes, we've been putting radio packages on gobblers. We'll go there.
Politically correct.
Yeah, for many years. And we recently, and I say this was largely driven by Patrick Whiteman, was a PhD student of mine. He also was a postdoctoral researcher in my lab. He's now an assistant research scientist here at UGA, and he's a phenomenal person, moreover, but exceptional scientist. So he took all of the data from all of the birds we've marked and across a number of states, well over 1,000 birds that we had data on. And he looked at their survival and mortality rates and harvest rates. And yes, it is the largest known fate, meaning we know what happened to the bird because they were wearing a radio. It's the largest known fate data set that's out there. And what his findings show very clearly, which is interesting, and I'll back up a second. So we have data on a bunch of hunted sites that are both private and public land. And we also have a lot of data from a site that isn't exposed to hunting. And when he evaluated the data, he found that, not surprisingly, survival of toms is much lower when they're hunted, about 55% per year, meaning that about half, slightly more than half, are surviving each year. On the non-hunted side, it was well over 80%, which is interesting. Obviously, it's a lack of harvest. If you looked at predation rates, they were the same, whether hunting was occurring or not. About 15% of your toms are being killed by predators that are not human predators each year, regardless of whether hunting occurs. When he looked at harvest rates, meaning the percentage of toms you're killing every year, it was right at 30%. It was 29%. And it didn't vary. This is interesting. It didn't vary from public to private lands. It was pretty consistent. And I think that, that was a bit surprising to us because you kind of have this mindset that, man, they're getting hammered on public lands. They're getting hammered on public lands. But it really was pretty comparable from public to private. If you put all that together, predation's kind of the same. If they're not harvested, they live to the next year. What that tells you is that spring harvest is an additive form of mortality. And what that simply means is if you don't shoot them, they will be there next year for the most part. And I posted about this yesterday, and some of the comment, there's so many comments I can't possibly respond to all of them, but some of the comments are I think are funny in the sense that people were like, what the hell? We already knew. That's common sense. Believe it or not, this has been debated in the turkey world for decades. This subject of, if we don't shoot them, will they be there next year? Believe it or not, this has been hotly debated. And part of that is because back many decades ago, the mindset was that toms were all expendable. You just shoot them. I mean, they'll be there next year. There'll be plenty of birds there next year. That mindset is still out there. I talk to people that have that mindset that, if we can kill what's there, there'll be more next year. And what this data set pretty definitively shows is that mindset is flawed, that if you don't shoot them, they're going to be there next year. And to Bobby's question about state agencies, I wouldn't say I'm using it to influence anything they do. I'm making it available to them. And I think what that speaks to is this notion, and I got soundly criticized yesterday, which I don't care. That's fine, about this. Well, state agencies, instead of regulating us, they should be managing habitat, and they should be doing this, that, and the other. And my response to that was and is, look, the bottom line is state agencies are trying to thread a needle. they are trying to maintain hunter satisfaction, and to maintain hunter satisfaction, whether you agree with this or not is irrelevant. It's the realities of the life we live in. We want to hear turkeys gobble. That's it. We want to be able to hear birds gobble. That's what drives hunter satisfaction. So if you're an agency and you look at data that says if we don't shoot them, they'll be there next year. Well, if they're there next year, they're going to be gobbling next year. So, and agencies have known that, I mean, they have suspected this for years. And that's why you're seeing some agencies make tweaks to their season regs, partially because there's a recognition that if we don't kill them, they're going to still be there. And if we could maybe carry a few more birds over from one year to the next, then maybe we could make hunter satisfaction more consistent through time. That's just, whether you agree that an agency should do that or not, we can debate all day long. I get it. I totally understand. But that's just the reality of the needle they're trying to thread. And so yeah, I mean, the data set, to be honest with you, it's kind of intuitive to me, but it is very a rigorous data set. And to be honest with you, there were a number of agency biologists and administrators who were waiting on us to get this published, that they were aware of it. They knew we were doing the analysis. We've presented the data at meetings and conferences. They knew it was coming, and it's very difficult to argue with a data set that's that rigorous.
So question real quick. If I remember right, you also, as another reason to heed this, if I remember right, one of the things we talked about, and you threw out an example, a guy called and he's got I've got like 8 lone bears on the place, and I've, got these jakes. Can I go ahead and kill like 5 or 6 of them or something like that? And you were like, he didn't get the point. So let's just take that example and tell me, I don't know a better way to describe it. So if you have 8 lone bears on the place and you kill like 6 of them, or you have 8 lone bears on the place, you kill like 2 of them. In the second example where you only shoot 2 of them, aren't you more likely to have bigger, better nests and probably a better nesting success with more gobblers?
That we don't know for sure, but I will tell you this: there's a lot to unpack in that question, but we're not sure.
That's why it's you, not Bobby.
Yeah. Welcome to our world.
We're not really sure how harvest rates and what percentage of the toms we remove and when we remove them. Right. All of that matters. So from the standpoint of disrupting breeding, we've known for decades that how many you kill or what percentage you kill and when you kill them is what matters. That and there's a lot of complexities there that we're trying to understand, and we're going to get there. We don't know. There have been studies. There was a study back in the 1980s in Alabama actually showing that really intensive high harvest of toms early in the breeding season disrupted nesting to the point where it had a measurable impact on the population on that site. What that means at a broad scale, we don't fully understand. But I will tell you this: in the absence of hunting, population that we're monitoring is about 80% more productive than all of our hunted populations.
That tells you a lot right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and people will listen to that and go, "Oh, damn it, Mike, you're advocating that we not hunt." No, calm down.
No.
I think what the data from the non-hunted population, what we're doing with that is we want a benchmark. And if you have a benchmark for this is what a population looks like when we're not tweaking it, right? When we're not harvesting animals. And here's what all of our populations look like that are being harvested. And here's the different scenarios that they're being harvested under. This scenario is a season opening date of this with a bag limit of this. And if you study enough of that complexity through time, and as states are making these regulations changes, that I'm not making these changes. I'm simply studying, and not just me, there are others that are studying these populations as agencies are making these changes. Then we can document what happens as that occurs. And we know what it looks like, what a productive turkey population in the absence of hunting looks like. We know what our hunted populations look like, and we know where we'd like to see our hunted populations be for them to be sustainable. Now, how do we get from the far left closer to the center, knowing that the far right, being the unhunted population, we obviously don't, I mean, we don't want to go there, right?
No.
We want that sweet spot right in the middle where our bag limits are the most appropriate, our season opening dates are the most appropriate, our hunting pressure, whether it's, the number of hunters that are on the landscape, the number of tags sold, whatever that is, I want to provide data to the agency so that they can identify where that sweet spot is in their state. And there's a bunch of other researchers that are doing the same thing, whether it's in the Southeast or out in the Midwest or the Northeast. Having the absence of hunting allows us to see what the far side to the right is, and then we can see where we currently stand on our other populations. And as agencies make these changes, we can see, are we heading towards a little closer to the middle, or are we not? That's what a lot of studies that are ongoing now are focusing on.
It's fascinating. I think that there are actually some similarities in the early days of an awakening of understanding deer management in the days we're in today, especially with the intensity of research in the last years, led by you and a lot of your, counterparts. When we see our population dip, what's going on, and we've studied it harder. So for me, we are for everybody, but you still, I think, need to make a decision whether you have a place or, even more importantly, a hunting club. I mean, you talk about the state decisions, but more importantly, just like the gamekeeper practices, it needs to be all the way granular down to each individual piece of land. That's how it actually happens.
That's right.
So what I think I hear you saying is people can make a decision, just like, hey, if you've got a hunt club and you want to shoot every deer with horns, I don't judge that. I do not at all. I'm just saying you're going to get, if that's what you want, then enjoy it. Be careful about what you might do to the place long-term or whatever. Health-wise, maybe there's too many deer if you don't shoot your does and all, but I'm not judging that. I do not at all. But if you do that and you're wanting to shoot big deer, it's not going to really happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you just need to make a decision. Am I just going to shoot deer or am I going to manage deer? And of course, more and more and more people. It's just about getting what you want. And all I'm saying, there's, to me, similarities with turkeys that we've learned, that I've learned, so I'm saying this, is that do you want to shoot every turkey you can, or you want to have the most turkeys possible on your place? And with the technology today, with these cameras, especially cell cameras, you can actually, I think, find out more meaningful information about the turkeys because you're not in there disturbing it all the time. If you have a place, and we have, for your example, 8 longbeards, and the group in my hunting club, we agree we got 20 longbeards or 40 longbeards or 2 longbeards, whatever. If you can take the initiative to make a decision about what you're going to do instead of just do it haphazardly, I think you'll end up with a better place in the long term. Now, I'm not saying this in judgment of anybody and trying to tell anybody what to do, other than maybe help them have more fun with their place long term. That's all I mean. Make a decision maybe by listening to people like Dr. Mike and all the information out there, and I think it's kind of fun to make a decision, and then especially when you start seeing the results. What I have learned is like putting less pressure on them, not killing so many, has definitely helped the amount of gobbling, and that's on not just me, but other people that I'm very close to aware of. And I don't know, we've been having better nest success in the last couple of years consecutively in all the places we have harvested less and left less. Now, do I know that? No, for sure caused it. Could just be the times we're in and the weather conditions and whatever. But I guess, and I'll end that, he's the one with all the best information. But just make a decision about what you want. and the information's out there to get you there,
Something that that hit my mind while you were talking, Toxie, is, and I got asked this yesterday on one of my social accounts, and I don't remember. It was a very cordial comment and request, but basically this person said, are you saying, he basically was implying that, these data are kind of loaded in that, almost as if the hunter's being, the finger's being pointed at the hunter. And I could not disagree anymore.
Me too.
And I'm not just, this is not me, this is us. There's a lot of us that are trying to provide agencies with appropriate information, whether it's about harvest, whether it's about land management, fire, whatever. But my response that I wanted to clarify for this young man, I believe, was that, the bottom line is, it's incumbent on agencies to make regulations that are biologically appropriate. It's not on us to police each other. Although, and to Toxie's point, it's not on us to judge each other.
No,
it's
just
not.
Be a good example. Be a good example. That's all you got to do.
What it is, it's incumbent on people like me to provide information that decision makers can use to make regulations that are biologically sound. Do they always do that? No, absolutely not. But if I and others provide information that they can use, then it's incumbent on them as the agencies to make regulations that are sustainable and make sense. It's on us to work collectively as turkey hunters to make sure that we can do whatever we can to positively influence the landscape from this bird's perspective, whether it be sound harvest management, whether it be land management, whether it be trapping or plant, whatever it is. And we talked about this on this podcast before. Do what you can to make an impact, and let the states do their job, which is to create regulations that make sense. And I got soundly chastised yesterday about, the agencies are at fault here. The agencies are trying to regulate harvest while not worrying about land management or anything else. Come on. I mean, let's be realistic. If you don't know the challenges that a state agency faces, whether it starting all the way from the legislative process to the political process to the funding mechanisms that run the engine that is these agencies, to the personnel that they have, to the lack of man and woman power, on and on and on. If you're not familiar with those challenges, you should be. You should make an appointment and talk with your local biologist and just listen to what they're trying to accomplish with under very challenging circumstances. It's not the agency's job to do everything. It's our job. It's our job as gamekeepers and stewards and managers to do everything we can, whether it's 1 acre or 1,000 acres or whatever it is.
Amen.
It's going to fall on us.
That number study is one hole in a bucket, and there's several holes in a bucket in this turkey bucket. Moving the needle to that sweet spot. Maybe we do need to self-limit a little bit. I'm probably not going to use the hashtag tagged out this year. I rarely do, but I'm going to also do a bunch of habitat work and try to improve my habitat. And so, if we decide to limit our numbers at the hunting camp or whatever, that's great. But we can move that sweet spot over even further by plugging more holes in the bucket. There's no one answer.
The Furminator is the industry's most versatile piece of food plot equipment, allowing plotters to do every step of the process, working the soil, adding seed and soil supplements, and compacting, from start to finish with a single implement. It's hassle-free by design. Set it for the seed size and simply drive the tractor, and the Furminator does the rest. Check it out at thefurminator.com.
Hey guys, Dudley from Gamekeepers here. I want to tell you about the all-new Gunner Dog Bowl. It's designed for home and built for travel. It's customizable, leak-resistant, light on weight, solid on durability, and rust-proof. Like other Gunner products, they're made in Nashville and designed for everywhere.
Arkansas's turkey population has plummeted from historic highs. The former turkey coordinator in Arkansas, who has recently left for another position, Arkansas makes changes to their regulations several years ago. They shift the season date back a little bit later to where the science says it should be, to be as conservative as possible. They change their bag limits. They limit the harvest of jakes. At the same time, they create a turkey stamp that provides a funding mechanism for the agency to turn around and put money back into improved management on public lands. They are impacting hundreds and thousands of acres using that program. And as I would expect, the last few years, they seem, we'll see if the data holds true over the next, say, 4 or 5 years, but their production has trended up slightly each year. Their harvest has trended up slightly each year. And are they out of the woods? Absolutely not. But are they heading in what appears to be the right direction? Yes, it does appear that they are. If that's the sweet spot, then maybe they've identified it. And that's what we're trying to get to. Can we make changes that push us towards sustainability at the levels at which we want them to be, that maintain our satisfaction? Can we do that? And if we can, how do we get there? That's what we're trying to establish now in a bunch of states. Man, and I'm going to talk about this at the convention, if you look at turkey research right now, there's more turkey research going on now than any time in my career. There are studies in states I've never, to my knowledge, there hasn't been turkey research in some of these states in 30 or 40, 50 years. And that tells me, one, there's a recognized problem. And two, it tells me that there are agencies and people who are in decision-making roles who see the problem and they're willing to put resources towards addressing it. And that gives me hope that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, it does. Mac, you look like you got a question.
Dr. Mike, how are you, sir?
Good, Mac. How about you?
Doing good. So with February approaching, I know a lot of people are going to want to get an idea of their turkey numbers on their property. And one way very easily you can maintain a good turkey population is not killing them all, obviously. So what are some quick tips as far as camera surveys, what numbers you feel comfortable with harvesting? That's an easy, non-expensive way to manage your turkeys by not shooting too many. What do you think people should be doing in February right now to get that idea and find that number or roundabout number?
That is a really tricky question. And here's why. In some ways, I have determined, and I'm not going to surprise anybody by saying this, Bobby's running cameras on his place and he has 5 toms on camera. Laney's got some cameras running on his property next door. He's got some toms on camera. Are they going to go talk to each other and determine?
Laney and I are not.
No, Bobby and I will not be speaking.
I would say turkey hunters in general would be the worst at sharing information.
100,000%.
Yeah, and that creates a real
That is not
challenge.
Anecdotal. That's a scientific fact.
Guilty.
Toxie doesn't even talk to us from the beginning of March.
Bobby, speak up. I can't hear you.
He's getting ready to disappear.
Yeah. So Mac, that's a tough question. If you're just looking at your property, which is a critical mistake unless you own a very large tract, toms are maintaining home ranges in the spring of well over 1,000 up to 2,000 or 3,000 acres. And they're moving about those ranges in what we've now determined is fairly, it's not, I'm not going to say predictable, but once you map out how they do it, it is somewhat predictable. They have areas that they are moving to and from on a fairly consistent basis. They have places they roost, they have places that they forage, they have places that they're looking for hens, and they keep revisiting those places. So they can literally show up on your property for 2 days and then disappear. You get pictures of them. Well, they are on your neighbors for the next 2 weeks, and then suddenly they're back on you for a couple of days. That creates some real challenges when it comes to understanding your quote unquote your birds. Unless you're owning large tracts, you don't own any birds. You're sharing all of them with your neighbors. And yeah, and that, as far as what percentage to shoot, man, it all depends on how many you're producing. If you're producing a lot of birds in your neighborhood and you're seeing a lot of jakes, and then obviously your harvest rate could be a little bit higher than if you're not. But we've kind of always hung our hats on 30% being sustainable, and that's the rate that we saw with this recent data that we're talking about, 29%. But I'll tell you that the recommendations to limit harvest to 30% were predicated on production that's twice as high as what we see across the South right now.
Right.
Meaning 30% is not sustainable with the production that we see.
So I mean, it would be meaningful to at least, I know it's short term and in the moment, but if you have no jakes versus lots of jakes, it could help a little bit with that. But
sure,
I mean,
yeah,
to me,
it's a game time decision each year. I
Yes.
mean, you need to to the best of your ability. I mean, try to understand your local flocks. So this is a really good point. I'm glad you said that, Toxic, because somebody messaged me on Instagram this morning, actually, and don't tell my wife, but I was checking my phone while I was driving, and and he asked a really good question. This young man lives in California, and he asked a really good question. He's like, when should I start scouting for turkeys? And I was like, last week. Get out there right now when they're still in their winter flocks and understand what you're dealing with if you can. Because those winter flocks of toms are going to be near hens right now, even if they're not associating with them. A lot of times they are. Get out there and see how many toms are in that winter flock, because that winter flock is about to become the breeding population in your area. That big flock of, say, 10 is going to split up into 3 groups. Let's say that's the 10 toms that are in your neighborhood. That's it. That's the only 10 that are there. So if you can find them in their winter flocks now, before they start splitting up, you can get a pretty good sense for what you're dealing with. And then if you can figure out, how many of them came to your property, well, then you know where the rest of them are. They're within a couple miles of that location. They're just on a neighbor. This is a great time to start trying to figure out how many are out there.
Do you have a follow-up, Mike?
I do. So it seems like to me, at least in our little focal area in Northeast Mississippi, for the last 2 years, everybody seems to be talking like, hey, I had a good hatch. Hey, I had a good hatch. I've got a lot of turkeys on camera. Is there anything is it weather that's played that factor in the last couple of years? Is it people are running more cameras and just paying more attention to it? Or what do you think that could be? Because it seems like the last 2 years, everybody's seeing more turkeys.
Well, the data across a lot of our study sites doesn't bear that out. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that we, with a few exceptions, we haven't seen any appreciable difference in our data set the last few years. But with my own eyes, I agree with you. I've seen, like the property near my house here in Georgia, I have seen a difference the past few years. We know that there are these fluctuations through time. In fact, many years ago, George Hurst would say you only need one good hatch every 5 years. You need one good bumper hatch every 5 years. And if you got that, you can make it work. But boy, if you could get 2 in a row, you're in the money. He used to say that all the time. And at the local, scale, Mac, I think it can range anything from the onset of nest initiation was more consistent that particular year. What makes that more consistent is hens coming out of the winter in better condition. So if you had a good mass crop in the fall, you had a not a very severe winter, you had green up that maybe was just a touch earlier, talking days here, you could have had hens come out of winter in better condition, literally being 6 ounces heavier than they were the previous year. That matters. They would have then been expected to be more synchronized, and when they started nesting, that would create predation rates that were lower in that area, and you would expect to see better nest success. You would then expect to see better brood survival because you would have more broods on the ground a couple weeks earlier, and those broods would have higher survival. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those things that we don't really think about, we think about, well, weather, or we did some burning this year that we didn't do the previous year. You got to think those flocks that you're seeing are being affected by a myriad of factors on your property and around your property. Think bigger, think the population, kind of perspective. And to me, it starts with the fall. How are these birds coming out of the fall and winter? And if they're in good condition, then most of them are going to be in good condition, and things translate from there. They kind of trickle down from what happens in fall and winter.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And then, hey, you catch a couple weeks of good weather, like, peak and nest incubation, in your part of the world's the same as it is here. It's about mid-April. So, man, you get a bunch of birds on the ground, and once turkeys start incubating, they are weather resistant. When she's sitting on the nest, she can tolerate miserable conditions and make it work.
Wow.
What really screws us is if she's laying and we get really, really bad weather, or more importantly, if she starts hatching and we start getting these monsoon rains,
Right.
and these, 3 days of rains and lows in the 40s and 50s, that's what kills us. Man, you get a bunch of hens nesting at the same time, and they get to hatching, and we catch about a week and a half of good weather. That in your little area, that can make a difference versus, say, 10 counties to the south of you caught a really heavy couple of thunderstorms or something. Well, there you go. And so you see these pockets that do quite well, and then 10 counties away, your neighbors down there are going, man, this hatch sucked. And that's what I've seen the last few years. Some really good signs that local populations did quite well, and then others that didn't. And that's the way it's functioned forever. Our goal needs to be, I think, that we need those pockets, which I've talked about on these podcasts before, that these light bulbs, these areas that are bright spots, we need more of them. And if we can work our butts off and we can get those bright spots to be brighter, and we can produce more of them, then the picture's going to get brighter every year. We're going to have some years that are just bad, regardless of what we do. But if we keep working diligently, those bright spots will win out.
So one little skew I put in there, and this is just subjective, but a much larger percentage of the people you talk to, Mac, or that we come in contact with here, are going to be people who are gamekeepers and taking matters in their own hands, and have likely been doing it for years, at least started now. Same with Doc, one of the leading, whatever, biologists, and the people that talk to him, by and large, a higher percentage are people who have cared about it, or looking for advice, or taking matters in their own hands. So if it's what you heard or saw and what we heard or saw, it's likely people that have been taking matters in their own hands more than just an average place left to its own devices. I've just noticed the ones that I know are really working at it are just about all having better success in the last years. Not to say it's going to always be that way, because Mother Nature's the trump card of all. But it sure seems like it has mattered a lot, actually.
So Mike, for the years we've been doing this podcast and we've had you as a guest, you've talked about a place in Georgia and you've babied it. There weren't many turkeys there. You were doing your best to try to encourage some. And prior to turning the mics on, you mentioned, hey, for the first time, I got 5 or 6 birds, and you held them this winter. I wanted to ask, what do you think contributed? What are some of the factors that you feel strongly about contributed to holding those birds this winter?
A couple things. One is we now have a neighbor that is improving the management on his property, and his property is 3 times the size of what I have access to. That's one. We had some land ownership changes in the neighborhood that went from, some leaseholders that have put quite a bit of pressure on the population, or are no longer hunting those tracks. And to be honest with you, we've busted our tails for years. I burn. I have a 2-year fire return interval, which is spot on for this part of Georgia, meaning every 2 years, I'm entering these stands, and I'm repeatedly burning them. Like we talked about before we started, I'm pushing that into March if I can, which I do every year. I don't do winter burns. I'm trying to time my fires where I can produce, herbaceous plant communities. We've done some fires at different times of the year. We've done mulching. Food plots. We've just worked really hard, and there hasn't been a turkey killed on that property in a decade. And like I told you before we started taping, part of it was that there were no birds there, and part of it was that I couldn't justify hunting knowing that there was one tom. That's the only bird on the property, or there were 2, and I'm not going to go kill one of those knowing that my neighbor's seeing the same too. So I just think you've seen a collective effort of a lot of things go right. And like I told you before we started taping, those birds have been on that property all fall. In fact, one of the best deer hunts I had, in fact, it probably was, outside of killing that particular 8-point we discussed. I had a group of toms that's still there now under me all day bow hunting. And it was, I joke with Tess Jolly, Tess gets to watch birds, and she sees things that are so cool, and she takes the most beautiful pictures of turkeys, and she has such a passion for it. And I'm so envious of her, because she gets to see these things that I have to see it through her lens, and I'm jealous of that. And I've told her. But that day I felt like Tess Jolly 22 foot up in a tree. I was watching those birds, and I was listening to them. And I remember thinking, in fact, I texted my wife and I said, "You're not going to believe there's 5 toms under me." And of course she was watching Georgia football game. She didn't give a damn about my bow hunt. And she was like, "Nice." That's all she says. I'm like, "No, you don't get it. There's 5 toms." And I remember putting in all caps, toms under me. They've been here for an hour. I've watched them feed all the way down the field and come back, and they're still under me. And one of them has got a set of daggers you would not believe. Cool.
Nice, honey.
Yeah.
So I was like, "What's the score?" And Georgia was throttling whoever they were playing. And I was like, "Okay, so I'll see you after dark." And that was in October. That was the first week of October, and they're still there. And it's so exciting. It's so exciting. When I downloaded pics the other day from our protein feeders and they were there, I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." I don't run cameras during the season for various reasons, because one, it just occupies too much of my time and mental space. And so I just stop running cameras during hunting season. I just move on, and I trust what I have before. But I had seen some scratching. I had seen some tracks, but I haven't hunted a lot this year, which we talked about earlier too. And to see those jokers on camera the other day, I was so happy Sunday when I looked at those cards. I was beaming. You couldn't have dropped me down no matter what you had told me that day. I was just like, I have got the same group there for the first time in a decade. I've got them there. Now, damn it, they better not leave. But I'm considering going and hunting and trying to, either me or the landowner, try to kill one of those birds. And that will be, if it can happen, will be a truly momentous occasion, because it's been so long coming.
Yeah, that's great to hear that come back. Is it fair for me to ask how big a place this is so we can kind of have a little perspective?
It's just under 600 acres.
Yeah. So
taking one bird off 600. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I had and one, is it 1 to 5?
Predicated on the numbers.
Is that what you're making your decision on? 1 to 5?
Well, in this case, yeah. And I do, unlike other turkey hunters, like we talked about, we may not communicate with each other very well. I do know, because I have worked with one of the adjacent landowners that owns a large piece. I do know from conversations with him that he has pictures of other, of different toms that are not. He is seeing these same 5, of course, but he's seeing a few more elsewhere. So I feel a little better about knowing that, okay, if I go in and pluck one of these 5 out, that's a 20% harvest rate. Given the fact that we haven't, and I have not seen any. I've seen 2 jakes all fall, but he has seen a few. That gives me solace that makes sense to me. I go in and take one of those out. He's going to take a couple off his property, and we've got some jakes that are coming up that will be there. So I feel pretty good about it.
I'm going to throw my sports analogy in there, listening to all this. So, and I'm getting old, and we got only so many seasons left, and I've been through a lot of losing seasons. And, people may not think that, but I have. And I'm thinking about different properties or places, or whether I leased it or we had.
Are we talking about turkey hunting, or we talking about Mississippi State?
We're talking both. Georgia football made me think of it, because Georgia football hadn't been on top always either. But I'm just saying, the best way to win the games or have a winning season and not have a bad season when you don't have them to throw away the rest of your life is build a lead and then maintain that lead. Don't flirt with, getting back to behind again. And so in his property is a good example of that. It's like he has had a losing season there for I don't know how many years, you never said, but quite some time. And now he's finally kind of starting to get a lead. He's going to make sure everything in his power, including if I have to back down and not shoot anything or not shoot much, I'm going to maintain my lead for life if I can. And that's the best way to have a winning season. So think of it that way. Do you want to listen and learn from everybody? I cannot learn too much. As much as I've heard and been around in my life, I am learning so much today just listening to him. I want to build a lead and maintain it. I don't want to flirt around with having to go through a year of my life and not having turkeys gobbling to hunt and stuff.
That's a good analogy.
So build a lead
don't play
and maintain.
From behind.
No, build when you finally, especially it helps you appreciate it more when you've had tough times. When you've had subpar teams. Once you get a lead, do whatever it takes to maintain it, including now we've learned from him. Take a look at your numbers to the best of your ability and try to figure out and have a plan. Nobody's supposed to be perfect, but do that to the best of your ability. It's one more thing to help you build the lead and maintain it.
Dudley, we've been talking. You've been quiet. You've been listening. Have you got a comment here or a question?
No, I'm just. I think this is contagious, and we may take 1 or 2 less birds off our place a year, but we're also implementing that with a lot of fun habitat work.
Yes,
and so you can combine all that and have a really fun year if you kill 2 instead of 3, and Mike was mentioning all this on 600 acres. I thought he was talking about being on 120 or something, but I was duck hunting with somebody in Arkansas the other day, and he mentioned that his family's turkey hunting area is about 3,000 acres, and they decided to take 2 off of it this year. And they're up in their fire game. They're killing fescue, things like that. But the good news is maybe in 5 or 6 years, they'll be able to take 7 or 8 off of it in a year.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you just kind of have to look in the future and try to plug all the holes in the bucket, not just one. You're not going to do it with just trapping. You're not going to do it with just feed or just whatever. You need to try to combine all these elements.
So, Mike, when you mentioned some of these harvest success rates on public and private being pretty close to each other, and when you guys sit down and analyze this data, do y'all take into consideration that there's a lot of guys that probably aren't telling you the truth?
Well, that's the power of telemetry data. That's the power of having radio marked birds. It's called a known fate analysis, and it versus say banding birds, where the only way you know if the bird was harvested is if the band was reported. The known fate data, the telemetry data, are extremely powerful. If those birds die, we know it. So that's how we get around that reporting bias. That's what you're asking, is reporting bias, and so we get around that with the telemetry data.
Yeah. So if you're a hunter and you see a bird he's got bands and he's got maybe a little antenna sticking up and you recognize that, do you want a guy to shoot that bird, or would you prefer him to leave that bird alone if he can see it?
I've always said the same thing. Do what you were going to do before you knew the animal was marked. If it's a deer wearing a radio collar and you wanted to shoot a doe that day, shoot her. If it's a turkey and you realize it's banned, that it's marked, and you were going to kill that bird 10 steps before it got right there, kill it. And the reason for that is simple. If we advocate for protecting our research animals, then we get biased data. We don't want that. We want rigorous, sound data that is as free of bias as possible, understanding that no data set is completely free of bias. So yeah, and I get this question. In fact, this is a funny. I've had hunters that have shot GPS marked toms and didn't even know the bird had a unit on its back. We had a hunter a few years ago that actually cleaned the bird and discarded the carcass.
Cut the breast out and didn't inspect the rest of the bird at all.
Didn't look at the back to see. And to his credit, he reported the bands. Of course, he kept the legs. He reported the bands to us, said I shot, band number, whatever it was. And we were like, well, where's the GPS unit? And he was like, there wasn't any GPS unit. And it's like, yeah, we just tracked that bird 2 days ago, and come to find out it was on his back, but he didn't know it was there. And the reason for that is simple. We go to, we use these, they're very small and they're colored dark. So, and what turkeys do with these units, not always, but most of them will preen themselves, and they'll kind of integrate this radio into their feathers. They'll preen around it, and they'll fluff feathers up around it, and they'll get it to where it's comfortable on, and it can be hard to see. But to your point, Bobby, we want hunters to treat those birds like any other bird. Yeah. Otherwise, we get flawed data. So
I've always thought, Mike, that like in the goose world, when they put those colored bands on a goose's neck or a swan's neck, that it made hunters really go after those particular birds. And could that produce flawed data as well?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a known bias in that world, that you have I'm not even going to call that person a hunter that would target marked birds to secure the mark or the band, in this case, the neck band or the leg band or whatever it is. That's not hunting to me. That's targeted assassination right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you can tell that our birds are marked when they get up to you. If they're really close, you can see the leg bands, you can see the GPS unit on their back. But most of the time, what the hunters tell us is they had no idea that till they got over to the bird that it had either mark on it. Back in the day, in fact, when I was at Mississippi State and I was trapping turkeys, we used to put these wing tags on the toms, these colored like cattle ear tags. You would just punch it through the skin on the upper part of their wing, and so when you saw them, you knew there's red number 8 or whatever. I suspect that there was some bias in those data sets. Obviously I can't prove it. I wasn't responsible for analyzing those data, but yeah, when you have those colored tags like that, it's tough to navigate the potential bias.
Wow. Lanny, have you ever seen a banded turkey?
I have not.
I don't think I have either. Toxie, have you ever seen one?
I don't think so. I've seen one harvested somewhere, or seen one somebody got mounted. But it was a long time. So like you're talking about 40 plus years ago.
Do they glue that unit on their back? Is that how you do it?
No, we put a
like a grommet almost.
These harnesses that basically like a backpack. It's got like parachute cord.
Okay.
That we kind of tie the unit under their wings, and then the unit sits between their wings on their back. So there's a little bit of give there. So when the bird moves, the unit's not static. It's not sitting there.
So like 40 or 50 years ago, and it was longer than that, when Daddy had them brought in and released, we didn't have any turkeys here and all that story. They had
the prequel.
Yeah, there was these wing bands, but it's almost like a metal grommet went through there. Isn't that right? Yeah, because I remember they found one of those hens. It was 10 hens. One of them they found dead that something caught, and so they brought the wing band out. And I remember seeing that metal with a tag. It
just clipped through the front of their wing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Funny story. So I mentioned this at some point today. I know I've mentioned this, but my wife and I we're renovating the house that we're living in, which is don't even get me started, but what a nightmare. But anyway, so we're at the final stages, and I'm going to knock on wood. I hope I didn't just jinx myself, but we're in the final stages of this. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and there's an electrician that comes in, and he's a very polite young man, and I'm old, so anybody that's under 40 is considered a young man. But he doesn't ask anything about who we are. Obviously, he's a guy that's performing a service for us. Super polite, super cordial, and of course he sees mounts in the house. There aren't many in the living area anymore. They're all in my office, and so he actually sees. I leave, and to go on a business trip a couple days ago, and I had some hats on the island of our kitchen, and the hats were created by Ultraview Archery, and they have the foundation's logo, Austin's Foundation logo on the hat, and they're giving some of these hats away this week in Vegas. And he saw the hat, and my wife was wearing one of the hats, and he just asked about it. So she started telling him about Austin and his hunting passion, and so they struck up a conversation. And my wife's very conversational and very, very personable, unlike me sometimes, and she can have a conversation with anybody. And she basically says, "Yeah, do you hunt?" "Oh yeah, I'm a big hunter. I love to hunt. I really love the turkey hunt." And she goes, "Really?" And he's like, yeah. And she says, "Well, my husband does a lot of turkey research," and she said he shot his head around and said, "What's your name?" And she was like, "Well, our last name's Chamberlain." And he goes, "Was that Mike Chamberlain that just left here?" And she was like, "Yeah, he shot one of my birds a few years ago. And so she calls me and she was like, I'm driving, I'm 30 minutes away or whatever. She calls me and she goes, hey, so do you remember, I'm not going to say this young man's name, but do you remember this person? I said, yes, I do recall that name. And well, that's our electrician that's working on our house right now. And he shot one of your birds a few years ago. And I said, yeah, I do remember that. And had a GPS unit on it. And he reached out to me, I believe, either on social media. And anyway, he ended up getting my cell number and texted me. So it's just a small world, here this guy comes into my house and doesn't know who I am, which is great. And it strikes up a conversation with my wife, and there's one of the guys that smoked one of my GPS Mark Toms and had no idea he did it, but he was super pumped that he had shot a banded turkey. So it was just a funny story that she literally called me and said, hey, yeah, this guy he shot one of your birds a few years ago. I was like, okay, cool.
Small world.
Yeah. I hope you were nice to him, maybe he'll wire your house correctly.
Well, he's actually fixing. Don't get me started, Bobby. He's actually fixing crap that the previous contractor. And if you're the previous contractor, I hope you're listening to this podcast. He's fixing crap that your subs, didn't do correctly, and unfortunately now I'm paying for the same thing twice. But that's neither here nor there.
Anybody else need to vent about anything at home?
Yeah,
or at it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to touch that one.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
Turkey season's
Are you
coming
kidding?
up.
Before turkey season, are you kidding me?
Yeah, Mike, I think we're fixing to lose Toxie, and we got a few more minutes of this. So you probably wanted to say goodbye to him, Toxie.
I do, but I'll see you soon, brother Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. We're 2 weeks out now, huh?
At the most,
2 weeks,
something like
2
that.
weeks
About
today.
Yeah, today
is
would
two.
be. That's right.
When this
2
airs,
weeks
it'll be
today.
a week.
Yeah, so I'll see you in Nashville, and I'm looking forward to it. It's always a fun time. It's super busy, but it's always fun.
It's the best.
Like a homecoming. That's
It's
right.
the best energy of any time of year in our history, at this place at least.
Yeah.
This time of year, and especially that event, it's just like the rebirth season and celebration of it. It's incredible.
Yeah, for sure. I look forward to it.
As they say, let's roll.
Yeah.
See you.
Yeah. So, Mike, look, we've gone on for a while. We've got a chance. You created a trivia question for Bronson last time he was here. So
I understand he was fussy about it too.
And he wanted to have an opportunity to come back to you with a trivia question.
Nice.
So
Okay, let me open a browser here and
Google up.
We've got a sponsor of our trivia questions at Sheffield Financial, and we're so proud to have them. Richie, have you got something teed up there to get this started?
Have you talked to them
Today's
about
trivia is brought to you by Sheffield Financial. Fuel your Gamekeeper projects with financing for power sports, outdoor power equipment, and trailers. Begin your next conservation adventure at SheffieldFinancial.com. Today's trivia.
Yeah, Sheffield they'll have a booth at the NWTF
You and Dudley
show.
are going to make an appearance there, aren't you?
I hope you will as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll hopefully be there. There's some great folks, Mike. If you
Now, how's the wedding financing going? Have you had a conversation with them about that?
I'm hoping to do that at the NWTF.
Oh, you're going to drop the bomb on them there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Ask them, do they find
Y'all bring your Venmo money for Bobby.
Yeah.
Mike, if you hadn't heard, I got a wedding coming up in the future.
I have heard.
That we're real excited about.
Yeah,
So.
we are.
You're not excited about the financial side of it. But you're excited. You're excited for the event. Yeah, I
It's
get
an
it.
investment in love.
That's right.
Yeah, it is an investment in love, Dudley. Look
That's
at you.
right.
So Bronson, I'm thinking he's trying to shake you up here, Mike. So, and for folks that don't know, these two used to work together.
Yeah.
They're longtime buddies, and they go back a long way. So I think we've suddenly got in the middle of maybe some eras that might be
that's
getting
fun.
shot
I like
both
it.
ways. So
Yeah, Bronson and I are good friends, and I will say this in this. I'm being completely transparent. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. He not just as a scientist, but just he's just a good person.
Yeah,
He's just a solid man. So when you reached out and asked me for a trivia question, it was a double-edged sword. I was like, I might be able to stump him, but I really don't want to. because I love Bronson to death. But all right, fire away. And if he gets me and I don't know it, I'm totally cool with it. Coming from him, I'm totally cool with it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Matt.
All right, Dr. Mike, you were playing for Just Eve OH, who left us a review, and the prize this week will be a bag of our spring protein peas.
Oh, nice.
So
Get
two
them in the
things.
ground for the spring.
Protein peas are what the Ashley buck loves so much.
That's right.
Grew so big.
And I know it's turkey season, but now, just like we're talking about planning, Mike's talking about planning long-term plans and working these plans. It's time to start planning for deer season too.
And could Just Eve, Ohio, be a lady?
It could be Just Eve OH, like Oak Hill, too. I mean, there's plenty of options.
Yeah. Got a local yokel on here.
Well, I'd like to think we've got a lady listener here is what I'm going to kind of go with. So, all right, go ahead.
All right, Dr. Mike. The question is, what is the Latin name for bighorn sheep?
I wonder how many times how many times has that come out of your mouth, Mike?
Like never.
Yeah.
I don't know why I don't. So would the genus be Ovis?
Yes.
Yes.
The genus would be Ovis. Bighorn horn. I can't. I don't know the species name.
The fact that you got Ovis.
I want to know what y'all's guess would be. Based on,
I'm not Latin.
I don't know the answer, but I would say probably like Montana, just because they're from the mountains or something.
I was thinking it was more like something like Canadensis or something.
Oh,
like
that.
I wanted to say that it started with a C, but I don't know why I even think that.
What does Ovis mean?
It has something to do with
I don't know.
I think it's just sheep. Like,
yeah,
I'll Google it and tell you.
So actually, this wasn't the real question. We were hoping Mike would go, "Oh my God, I can't believe he asked me that." Well, that's what we were hoping. So, but he basically got it, and then Lanny Googled it.
Yeah, I did. 100% Googled it.
Was it Canadensis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now
I don't
let's
speak Latin, but I speak Google.
So now let's go to the real question.
All right.
All right, Dr. Mike. So this is a true false, still on the same subject of bighorn sheep. Bobby's dreaming about bighorn sheep.
Obviously
I think.
so.
Yeah.
So bighorn sheep can deliberately rub the tips of their horns off on rocks, so the animal's peripheral vision is not impaired. True or false?
False.
Boy, he was quick to say that. So from what I read on Eduscapes, that is a thing that they are known to do.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say false just because it sounded too made up. I had to go with my gut.
Well, I thought Bronson wrote this, not you.
No, actually, I started to throw Bronson under the.
So you've got a redemption here, Dr. Mike. Since now that we know that is true, per Bobby, what is this process called?
Oh my God!
Golly, y'all coming with the thunder.
Is it like?
Man,
can we
next
talk about
time I get asked
whitetails
for
or
a
something?
trivia question? I'm gonna light somebody.
Huh?
Well, it's a thing, and a lot of times sheep hunters are trying to find one with
Brooming?
a full curl.
curl.
That's it, brooming.
Boom!
Yeah.
He nailed it.
Yeah,
Golly. There we go.
Yeah. And what made me think that is just I don't sheep hunt, which may be a good thing, or a bad thing. But I have hunted in Africa a number of times, and a lot of the outfitters will talk about whether it's a kudu or whatever it is that they want to try to get them before they start brooming off, meaning getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So yeah, it makes sense. That is interesting, though, that they intentionally do that.
They can intentionally.
They can. That's interesting because I would not have thought that would be a deliberate behavior. But interesting. Okay.
So Eduscapes is .com is
I don't even know
where I found that.
Eduscapes.
Yeah.
Do they have very good eyesight?
Is that a peer-reviewed
I think they have
website?
fantastic
I would think they would have
eyesight.
to have fantastic eyesight.
Yeah.
I would think they would.
So I
Yeah.
don't know
Interesting.
that that's peer-reviewed information, Mike, but it was on the internet. So,
So it's got to be true. Yeah, exactly.
We went with it, so.
Did you go on Chat GPT to get that question?
Oh gosh.
No, but look, right now, I'm not looking at my phone. So, and the video has frozen of you three. So I'm seeing what you looked like 5 minutes ago. But I just got a text from one of you saying brooming. So somebody is, I guess that's Laney. Somebody's trying to help me out. But now I got it.
I think
I got it
Mac's in
before
the
I just
house on
read your
that.
text.
Man.
Yeah, well, now we
Mac.
just learned a little something about Mac there.
Man, what?
Hey, Mac's a team player, buddy. Ride or die.
Thanks, Mac.
Ride or
Yeah.
die.
So, what did we learn today?
It goes back to me, jumping in here. I did a lot of listening today, but it is, making a plan on your individual property, realizing this is a long-term game. I mean, you might be worried about this spring right now, but you really need to be worried about what the next springs look like. So, do what you can. What is it? Work your plan your work and work your plan, and keep focused on the long-term, effect that you can have on this amazing bird.
Dudley?
Yeah. Just like the bumper sticker says, make your own luck. You know? Most of us, I would say on average, if we've got a chunk of private to hunt, it's not going to be huge. And the neighbor is probably going to be a turkey hunter as well.
No doubt. Here.
Work together with your neighbors, and try to cover all the holes in the bucket. Don't just focus on one.
Mac, did you learn anything?
Now that we're talking about turkeys, I'm going to have a lot of sleepless nights from now until March 15th.
I've already got Onyx up, just so you know.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I tell you, we always enjoy having you. I'm going back to early in the conversation. We were talking about deer. I'm still kind of in that mode right now.
Yes, you are.
We still got a few more. Actually, we can hunt to the 10th of February in
I know.
Alabama.
You can.
So. I've got an older deer that I'm kind of watching, and I have noticed it looks like he has lost 40 pounds since the last time I saw him.
Wow.
And so that's why I specifically asked you, how much weight are you seeing deer lose? Because I really would say
there's a significant difference when we're looking at it this morning. For sure.
Yeah. So anyway, I
hope you get him.
I love the thought of, just the biology of what all these deer go through during that rut, how much weight they lose. They're just not eating because they just so focused on reproduction. It just amazes me.
Yeah, they're fascinating creatures. That's for sure.
No doubt.
All right, well, everybody come see us at the NWTF. Mike,
Yeah.
please come hang out in the booth a little bit. We'd love to see you.
I will for sure.
Yeah, is your wife coming?
No, she said she did her one and only convention last year for a while. So, no, I'll be alone this year, and it's actually going to be a crazy week. I have to go to Arkansas before the convention to speak, and then I have to leave the convention and go to another speaking engagement the day after. So it's going to be a lot, but I'm looking forward to it. Like we talked about, it's such a fun time there.
One year, many years ago, Lanny, my wife went.
Yeah.
She wanted to go. She walked around about an hour and came back, and she said, after listening to all these people chirping on calls, she said, now I know why everybody wants to shoot a turkey. Because just listen to all that annoying calling. So this has been a lot of fun. We look forward to the spring. It is here, and thankfully it's here. Mike, good luck with all you're doing.
Be safe on the road.
Keep up the good work.
Absolutely.
Yep, same to y'all, guys. I appreciate it. I love joining you, and appreciate having a voice to put information out there for people to listen to.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, we feel the same way, and we're going to do this again, and I'm sure there's more to talk about. So, well, we're going to let you go, and why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Mac.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast, and be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.